Okay, I think we're about ready to go. Welcome everyone to a very exciting day. It's been many, many months of work as a team here. The Terrasos and Regen network development teams have been hustling and all of our respective partners to bring us to this day, the launch of the Terrasos Biodiversity Unit on Regen Network. This is an exciting day for nature markets. We're super excited to have all of you here. We've gotten really good interest, and I just want to make sure you all were aware we are going to record this. It's to make sure that all of you can get a copy and extend it to your networks, of course. And actually, Mauricio, if you have the ability to come on off of mute and activate your camera and maybe let people know how they can activate their closed captions, which we should be up and running. So if you can go ahead and share that, and if anyone's having problems, feel free to use the chat to let me know.
Yes, Dave, thank you. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's doing good. So I'm going to do it in English, and then I'm going to turn to Spanish to explain how to turn on the translated captions. So in the bottom of the screen, you'll see the caption, the CC button. Then right next to it, there's an arrow pointing up. You need to point in the arrow to click in the arrow. And then there's the my caption language. It should be turned in Spanish for the people who want the translation in Spanish, or in English for the people who want translation in English. All the webinars are going to be in English, so for Spanish speaking people, it should be turned in Spanish. And now I'm going to switch to Spanish. Hola a todos, espero estén muy bien. El webinar lo vamos a tener en inglés, entonces para los que necesitan traducción simultánea a través de subtítulos, tienen que ir a la parte de abajo de la pantalla donde dice Captions, hay como una CC, al lado derecho hay una flechita apuntando hacia arriba, hunden la flechita y ahí dice Caption Language o idioma de caption. Ahí le tienen que poner en español para que tengan subtítulos en español durante toda el webinar. Si tienen alguna pregunta, lo hacen por ahí por el chat o el Q&A y les vamos a responder. David, up to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We're going to go ahead and jump right in. Give you a quick idea of the agenda. We're going to start with the Regen team, talking more about Regen Network. Jump into TIBU, the Terrasos Biodiversity Unit. We've got a wonderful video to show you. We're going to have Simon Zadek join us from Nature Tech, and we'll have a section for Q&A. So it's about from end to end. We should be ending in about 90, or a little less than 90 minutes now. And as a reminder, again, we'll be recording this. And if you have questions or concerns, please feel free to leave those in the chat. And if any just specific questions you'd like our panelists to answer, please use the Q&A and feel free to type those questions in English or Spanish. I think we can should be able to manage both. So with that said, why don't we go ahead and get launched? Okay, Gregory, would you like to take us away? And you're muted.
There we go. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Mauricio. I'm very excited to be here, and I'll start by just giving a quick overview of this fantastic, my perspective of this fantastic partnership. So Regen Network is a platform for originating ecological assets and kind of has a full spectrum suite to help project developers and credit and method developers originate the highest quality biodiversity units in the world. And we're incredibly honored to be the technology partner alongside Terrasos, which has been doing groundbreaking work at bringing best-in-class biodiversity units into the market. And we're going to get to learn more about those specific units. And right now, you can go ahead and shift to the next slide. And Regen Network is, as I mentioned, focused on bringing technology specifically for nature markets. And that means that a lot of our focus is on creating tools that allow stakeholders to express data about specific places in ways that build trust and confidence about those units. So you can go to the map. Great. So we work all around the world and have built a platform that is co-owned and co-governed by our users. And we're going to get into the details of that in a little bit. I think for now, I'd like to actually pass it on to my colleague Mariana to start to introduce Terrasos generally and the Tebu unit more specifically, and we'll keep rolling from there. So thanks, everybody.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to try to move this into present mode. It's showing present on my side, but it seems not to be. So let me just see if I can change that. I'm going to do slideshow. Does that work?
Yep.
Okay. Wonderful. Okay. Go ahead, Mariana.
All righty. Well, first of all, good afternoon, good evening for everybody. I'm Mariana. I'm the CEO of Terrasos, and Terrasos is a Colombian company that has been sort of developing ecological credits and units for some time now. We have been pioneers in the creation of habitat banks in Colombia and Latin America, and then evolved to doing work in biodiversity credits, not just thinking about compliance markets, but also thinking about voluntary markets. So today we're extremely excited to be here. We do believe that we're all in the process of shaping a market, a biodiversity market. And I think the challenge that we have is to create a market that is transparent, that is inclusive, but also that delivers high impact and long-term results. So with that, many of you know, Terrasos has developed a protocol for issuing biodiversity credits. And today, we are shifting to this concept of the TEBU, the Terrasos Biodiversity Unit, which we believe kind of has the attributes that and represents the values of many of the stakeholders that really care about biodiversity conservation. So at the end of the day, what's a TEBU? A TEBU is a positive and permanent contribution to biodiversity. Next. Why TEBUs? Why biodiversity markets? And this is just an example from Colombia. If we did this across the world, we would see something very similar. On the left, you have an image where wherever it's green is where you would have very high potential for carbon sequestration projects because of the characteristics of the ecosystems that are there. To the right, you have where threatened ecosystems are. And if you notice, they don't match, right? So at the end of the day, biodiversity markets are complementary to carbon markets. And biodiversity markets, not only are they complementary, but they also have the potential to fill a gap in terms of conservation finance that carbon finance can't fill. So just to give you an example, the projects that Terrasos is developing, we have some that are as small, in parentheses, 100 hectares up to 1,000 hectares. And this is important because biodiversity and where it's mostly critical, it's also where most of the population is. And we know that it's very difficult to be able to secure large tracts of land in these areas. So biodiversity markets help us to protect what's left, but also to promote connectivity. And that's our goal in this process. Next. Other reasons why we need to invest in biodiversity, and it's the reality that global food crops rely on pollinators. In the case of Colombia, for example, but also the rest of the world, coffee varieties depend on these pollinators. So all the wonderful coffee that everybody drinks around the world in a way depends on the biodiversity that we have in Colombia. 25% of modern medicines are derived from wildlife. Species diversity is critical for climate change adaptation and mitigation, and at least 1 million species are facing extinction. Now, what's the problem that we have and that we want to avoid? This is a picture from a real life example of an investment made by a corporation into biodiversity conservation. It was a short-term initiative. It was a classic 3 to 5 year term project. And at the end of the day, this is what happened. And it happened in part because the agreements with the landowners weren't long-term. So how do we avoid these kinds of things? And this is where, for us, the TEB is a representation of the solution. So we want to avoid short-term conservation initiatives, dispersed interventions that are not results-oriented, and money being wasted. Next. So in order to do this, we're going to a situation where all our projects are structured as habitat banks, and habitat banks create ecological outcomes that are represented in TEBUs, where individuals, companies, NGOs can pay for those ecological outcomes. Here we have early investments. Payments are only delivered once outcomes are achieved. Land is secured for 30 years. There are structures that ensure financial transparency and traceability, reduce transaction costs for everybody, can generate economies of scale, and reduce the financial risk and uncertainty for those who pay. Next. So at the end of the day, habitat banks sell biodiversity credits or sell TEBUs, and each TEBU represents 10 square meters for 30 years. But what's in a TEBU? And this is really important because TEBUs not just represent an area, but the cost of a TEBU and the price of a TEBU is associated to the management cost, but also stewardship. So when you purchase a TEBU, you're paying for all the land sourcing and due diligence, the trees and the planting, the land lease, the fencing, transportation, monitoring, insurance that may go with these projects, reporting, land taxes, trust fund fees, monitoring, legal counseling, communications, project management, and land protection and stewardship for 30 years. So what TEBU is really, you buy today, but you're ensuring protection for 30 years. Next. So summarizing what that is, it's a permanent contribution, it's 10 square meters, 30 years, and it's performance-based. The TEBUs that are out there for sale right now, for example, are TEBUs that already represent ecological outcomes that have been achieved. And now I'm going to explain a little bit how that works. Next. So how do we determine how many TEBUs a project can issue? Well, it's based on 5 different factors. One is how threatened that ecosystem is. So the more threatened an ecosystem, the ecosystem where the project is based, the more points it gets. Of course, it's also a function of the total area of the project, how it contributes to landscape connectivity. Again, connectivity being critical for biodiversity conservation. 3, the project duration. So the longer the project, and no project that is developed or structured for less than 20 years can issue credit. But if my project has been structured for 30 years, it will it will get more points than if it's just 20 years, for example. And then finally, how the activities, what types of activities are going to take place within the project area. And based on your preservation and your restoration areas, then you will have to do, it'll also have an impact in terms of the cost of the project. So these 4 factors will, at the end, have an effect on how many credits your project can issue. Next slide. So let's say my project, based on those scoring factors, let's say my project can issue 100 tables. I can't sell those tables all at once. Those tables are released as the project fulfills management and ecological milestones. Today, we're going to see one of the projects that is issuing tables, which is a global. And right now we are here. We've only released 20% of the credits because we've only achieved the milestones, you know, that first set of milestones. Once you achieve the next set of milestones, then you can release the next 40% and then the next 40%. And the idea is that you can release 100% of the credits in the first 15 years of the project. So then the question is, well, if it's a 30-year project, then, you know, what happens? So next slide. So this is an example of the cash flow of one of these projects, where all the sales, but also the release of those credits are happening, in this case, in the first 12 years of the project. This is just an example. But at the end, what's happening is that a percentage of each sale, which can be between 10 to 40%, depending on cash flow needs, etc., will go into a sinking endowment. And that endowment will begin to fill until the last day that we have sold tables, so that the project has enough money to be able to function for 30 years. In other words, it works very similar to your pension fund, right? So we all go to work, we get paid, and a percentage of our wage goes to our pension fund. It's the same principle. So at the end of the day, what you're doing by buying a table is that you're creating a pension fund for nature. And that's the invitation today. Next. These are some of the indicators that we are in, and you'll see this in a glow. These are some of the indicators that we are measuring in some of our projects. This is El Globo specifically, always looking at composition, structure, and function. And there are ecological milestones that are associated to these different types of indicators. And then one thing that's very important is that the tables cannot be released for sale. They can only be released for sale when there is third-party verification. And third-party verification happens on 2 fronts. One, financial and contractual, and in terms of documentation. And we're working with KPMG. They have, you'll see El Globo, for example, has already been verified by KPMG. And then we work with local academic institutions that verify the ecological outcomes. So it's a third-party verification that happens by 2 different parties that have 2 different types of expertise. Next. And then at the end of the day, sort of what we're looking for is, it's not just the governance of the table, you know, and how the table protocol, for example, gets updated and who gets to decide what and how we bring in public participation. But it's also thinking about the governance of the table, but the blockchain governance, which is the system where we are keeping track of everything that's happening in these projects, and then also project governance. So at the end of the day, what we're building is a market infrastructure where we have different layers of governance that create a robust and transparent system that really brings kind of true accountability. Next. And then finally, some of the claims that buyers can make when they buy tables in terms of how they're contributing to SDGs. Next. Where they can report. Many of you all know that GRI just updated their biodiversity standards. So again, you know, tables become a clear way in which you can begin to communicate that. And all the companies that are buying tables already and that have, you know, and that have begun to work with us, we will work with them to communicate, you know, these results. And that's really part of the journey. It's part of shaping this market. It's really understanding what corporates need, how they need to communicate it, and working together with us to be able to deliver on that. So with that, I'm going to just share a small video that we have for everybody here so that you can enjoy it.
There is only one planet Earth. We only know of one place in the universe where the exuberance of life exists. That exuberance is expressed in terms of biodiversity. Countless plant and animal species that are our greatest wealth and upon which we depend. But that wealth has been diminishing, and we are seeing in real time the consequences of biodiversity loss. It is up to us to do something about it. It is up to us to formulate solutions that meet the circumstances, that connect available technology with biodiversity and with the desire of people and the private sector to get involved and act to take care of our planet. In response to this situation, Terrasos, in partnership with the IDB Lab and the Santo Domingo Foundation, have developed TBU, Terrasos Biodiversity Units, an innovative tool for the conservation of this tapestry of life together. Each TBU is a biodiversity unit corresponding to an area of 10 square meters intended for 30 years for the conservation and restoration of ecosystems within a Terrasos habitat bank. These units have the highest standards of monitoring and transparency through a tokenization process that makes use of blockchain technology. Anyone, any organization, any company can acquire one or many TBUs as a gesture of commitment to preserving and restoring ecosystems for decades to come. By acquiring a TBU, you are protecting and maintaining a vital space for wildlife, flora, and ecosystem services. You are ensuring their preservation for future generations and their diverse cultures. A unique opportunity opens up for the preservation of our natural wealth with tangible support for the conservation of vital habitats for the flora and fauna of our planet. In this journey towards reconciliation with nature, each credit acquired is a giant step towards the future where biodiversity is the collective solution to the challenges we face as a species. Together, we can build a world where every being has its place. Are you willing to join this mission for the planet? Invest in TBU and bet on 30 years of nature conservation.
Alrighty. So with that, I'd like to pass it on pass it on to Greg to talk a little bit about, how does blockchain fit into this, into this market infrastructure, and why we're working together to, again, democratize, decentralize, disintermediate biodiversity finance and conservation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mariana. It's really exciting and inspiring. And I guess, David, if you're going to screen share, great. If not, I can. As Mariana mentioned, some of the core reasons for blockchain at this intersection are really around data transparency, governance, democratization. Regen Network's mission is to help scale nature markets by unlocking the potential of local and international communities to own and govern the definition of value and access best-in-class science and technology in order to create truly rigorous and high-value credits and bring them directly to market in a disintermediated way, exactly as we're doing with Terrasos. So it's really a dream come true to have this partnership. You can go to the next slide. So one of the problems that we see is a lack of confidence in existing market mechanisms because they tend to be opaque and inefficient. Data is not easily spread. It takes a long time for governance and baseline standards to be updated. Stakeholders are confused. And primarily, that's at the intersection of the design of the institutions of verification and the technology that is being used in order to create verification processes. You can move to the next slide. So we're really coming at this from a totally new paradigm. And that paradigm is to create a network of trust between actors in which everyone has all of the information they need at the moment that they need it in order to verify claims. So that means that buyers need to have access to information, verifiers need to have access to information at the moment that they need it. And so this is really a shift from a paradigm of many hundreds of pages of reports and PDFs and emails being the primary technology that's being used to run everything, to on-chain data, governance of standards, and transparency and visibility between the different actors who need to work together in order to generate actions in a landscape and verify that those actions have taken place in the stewardship of our most precious natural ecosystems. You can go to the next slide. So what we've built to accomplish that is a scalable and flexible platform for managing ecological assets, from issuance to sale and use to governance of standards. And so that comes in 3 layers. At the base layer is a public ledger system that allows for attestation, data management, tokenization, and claims management to all be running on a public network, so that there isn't a central point of failure. There's no single entity that has control over the entire system. We have a partnership between different actors, from buyers and land stewards, sellers, project developers, academic institutions, who co-manage that ledger and data management system so that no one can manipulate it, and it becomes a solid reference point for truth and verification of claims. At the next layer up, we have a registry system that is dynamic. We'll get a little bit later into what I mean by that, but at the top level, it allows the right stakeholders to be involved in governance, verification, and issuance, and to have full transparency about who is making what claim, about what piece of land using what data, and who has provided secondary verification that that claim matches the actions on the ground. That's the registry system. And then once you've passed through that registry system, you have access to a peer-to-peer marketplace. What does that mean? That means that there's a disintermediated market system where project developers can directly access buyers without intermediaries. This creates efficiency so that the most amount of capital can go to preserving the landscapes that are important as possible. So some of the key features that allow this system to work are standards governance tools. So in addition to having transparency around the data that underlines a claim, it's also really important to have efficiency in upgrading and publishing standards and to understand the work that has gone into those standards. Who sits on the standards body? These are some of the most important issues for legitimacy. These same governance tools can also be used for project governance and network scale governance. So as Mariana mentioned earlier, there's really 3 layers of all important governance to create the legitimacy engine that stands behind the Tebu and is part of the service that the Regen network platform provides to our partners. Regen Network also allows for seamless integration between monitoring, reporting, and verification, credit issuance, credentialing, third-party verification, and curation as well. This all provides the foundation for innovation with integrity. It allows buyers and sellers to be clear and also innovate at the same time. There's always a tension between being the most rigorous possible and innovating to create new instruments that actually achieve the effect that we want in the world. And with Regen Network and our blockchain-based system, we can have both at the same time, innovation and integrity. So all of this comes together to have a tool suite for digital monitoring, reporting, and verification, rating system, third-party verification, curation, and standards governance at the fingertips of our partners on both sides of the marketplace. You can go to the next slide. So speaking of MRV, we integrate multiple different sources of data. So as new sources of monitoring mature, we can integrate them at will. And so for projects like Terrasos, we've already metabolized their existing reporting system. We'll show a little bit later how that can make auditing and verification much more efficient. And as we continue to develop camera traps, bioacoustic, real-time satellite monitoring to create ever more rigorous guarantees, all of that data can plug in through our system. You can keep moving. So all of this comes together for 3 of the key tools that we've been excited to be co-creating with Terrasos, which help, I think, solidify the relationship and bring Tebu into the market as a best-in-class biodiversity unit. One of those, as we mentioned, is program governance. So tools that can bring together both sides of the marketplace, as well as independent academic institutions and local stakeholders to really co-govern these data standards and hold one another accountable and build trust and transparency. And then the tools around data transparency, again, so we can understand who is saying what about where, using what methods, what data, and who has verified that, and a suite of tools for both sides of the market to understand what assets have been issued and where they are and who owns them and if they've been retired or not. So you can, and what claims are being made against them. You can move to the next slide. So this is an example of a document verification tool that we created for Terrasos and KPMG so that KPMG could have a much easier time at verifying that the documentation that's behind this Agua Dulce issuance of Tebu units is the same exact documents that are backing the token that lives on the blockchain. And this uses cryptographic technology to prove that they are indeed the same documents. So that makes auditing much, much faster in this case. You can move on to the next slide. So all of this comes together to create a shift from registry as an institution and a noun to registration as a process and a verb. We're creating tools that allow Terrasos to accelerate the scale at which they can build new habitat banks and provide data, and the scale at which market actors can analyze that data and issue payments so that we can actually act in the time frame that's necessary to meet nature positive goals. You can move to the next slide. So here's an example of data stream from Terrasos that's just bringing this all together into the dashboard in which you can actually see and interact with the data that's underpinning these Tebu tokens. You can move to the next slide. So really excited now to pass it off. I think we're going to get a deep dive now about El Globo and the specific project that is now for sale in the marketplace.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you for all that clearance on blockchain and on how Regen network works. So now I'm gonna tell you about where these credits are being issued and all the details of the project, of El Globo project. Go ahead, Dave. So El Globo Nature Reserve, it's a conservation, sustainable use of nature resources project. Go ahead. And this has a really interesting story. So, I didn't present myself. Sorry. I'm Mauricio Serna. I'm the owner and co-founder of El Globo. And my family has been in the area of El Globo for about 40 years now. My grandfather, and this is the history that I was talking about, he bought this piece of land back in the 70s and he used it to cattle ranching. So he logged almost all the forest he could to really produce the much of the land he could out of cattle ranching. Go ahead. So back in 2020, in 2019 more or less, I'm a biologist and I went to El Globo for my first time because in the 90s the land was grabbed by guerrilla forces here in Colombia. So I don't know if you all know about the armed conflict in Colombia, and in the 90s the guerrilla took land out of my family and they couldn't come for 25 years. So in 2018, we went back and we were able to come back. It was my first time in El Globo, and we figured out that El Globo was located in tropical Andes, one of the most biodiverse and threatened ecosystems in the world. Go ahead, Dave. So the Andes is being threat, and El Globo has some threats to biodiversity conservation that are illegal logging. So there's a lot of illegal logging in the area due to there's a specific palm that it's really precious to build houses. I'm going to show it to you afterwards. Poaching, there's a lot of poaching in the area, illegal poaching of the puma, for example, illegal poaching of birds and of different wildcats. We also have fires. This year, when it was really, really hot, back in January, February, we almost had the project burnt by a wildfire and an uncontrolled wildfire. And the other threat is traditional land uses like cattle ranching and agriculture. Go ahead, Dave. So El Globo was dedicated to deforestation and cattle ranching. And as I was telling you, in the 90s, there was this armed group that settled in the region, and my family couldn't come back. This is how El Globo looked like 30 years ago. And now you're going to see how, because of what we've done and the activities that we've done, how El Globo has grown the forest again. Go ahead, Dave. So in 2021, we launched a Global Habitat Bank with Terrasos. That's the map where Globo is located. And the main goal was to contribute to the mitigation of the triple planetary crisis. And with the launch of the Habitat Bank, all the El Globo project had a much structured vision of conservation. Go ahead, David. For example, in terms of conservation goals, El Globo seeks to conserve and restore cloud forests, its species and ecological interactions. And specifically, we expect that the degraded areas, so the areas dedicated to agriculture and the deforested areas dedicated to cattle ranching, will be replaced with forest cover. The second is the disturbance factors, such as cattle ranching, such as poaching, such as logging, will be reduced and mitigated. The third one is that the ecological connectivity will be improved. So this is very important, as Mariana was saying, because this can improve biodiversity. The fourth one is the key areas for the reproduction, refugee, and feeding of species will be protected. And the last one is that the key areas identified as important for hydrological regulation will be protected. There's a big wetland in El Globo, and there's 16 water springs in El Globo that give countless ecological interactions and ecosystem services, and that's what we want to protect in El Globo. And how we will protect it? We will measure this impact indicators that are two types. One of them are area-based, and the other ones are uplift indicators. So in terms of biodiversity, we'll measure floral, birds, and mammalian species richness, and we will also measure vegetation composition and a structural biodiversity index in plants. In terms of landscape, we'll measure recruitment and mortality rate in restoration sites, and we will also measure landscape heterogeneity, not net loss of native land covers, and also change in artificial and degraded land covers. And also, because there's a lot of questions about carbon, we measure tree biomass and carbon sequestration as a co-benefit of biodiversity. So this is all the impact indicators that we measure. And now I'm going to take you like to a little trip into El Globo's huge biodiversity. Go ahead, Dave. So all the pictures I've shown are from El Globo, and here you will watch a video about a wax palm. That's our national tree. So Colombian national tree is the wax palm, and this is the landscape that you're gonna see at El Globo. I'm just gonna let you watch the video. I'm gonna start talking about land covers, for example. You'll see that here we are in a forested land cover, but as you will see, there are still a lot of patches of degraded areas that were dedicated to cattle ranching back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s before the guerrilla came. So this is the type of landscape you're going to see. It's a cloud forest, an Andean, high Andean forest, and it's completely beautiful. And there you'll see the clouds popping up. Go ahead, Dave. And now I'm going to show you some of the most interesting species that we have in El Globo. The first one is the yellow ear parrot. That's going to show up just in a second. There you go. This species is really interesting because it was critically endangered about 20 years ago due to the logging and unsustainable use of the wax palm. It's the only tree where this bird nests. So it was critically endangered, and due to this type of conservation projects, the yellow ear parrot has decreased in its threat status following the IUCN threat status. Go ahead, Dave. This is one of the pictures that I like the most of El Globo. It's it's an owl. For me, it's the most beautiful owl in the Andean forest. It's called the currucutu, and it feeds on small mammals. And because of this type of bird, we can think about the ecological interactions that are happening in the field and that we are also protecting. Go ahead, Dave. This is the palm that I was telling you about that is really logged, and it's legal to log this palm because it's really precious for house building and furniture building. And in El Globo, we have a huge forest out of Macana, this Wittinia calbergeri palm. Go ahead, Dave. And the last palm that I'm going to show, it's a fern actually. It's called the helecho sarro, and it's also a really important species, one of the more ancient species that we have in El Globo, and it's really beautiful. We have a lot of like patches of forest dedicated to this fern. Go ahead, Dave. And now I'm going to show you the El Globo's big three. That means the three mammals, the three biggest mammals that we have in El Globo. This is a deer, really beautiful deer. All these videos were key with Terrasos to convince my family to launch a conservation project in El Globo. So all these videos, more than being just to convince people, these are also videos that show us how we are monitoring biodiversity and how are we doing actions in the field to know which species are we protecting. Go ahead, Dave. The next one is one of the most important videos that we've captured because it was the video that helped change
Hold
the
on,
land
we
use.
can't see it. We can't
Okay.
see it.
Dave,
Dave,
next slide. Just a second, we're having a little technical problem. Wait, I'm gonna change. You can, Mariana, can you help us share screen?
except
Okay.
it won't let me in.
Yeah, me neither. There you go. I can. I'll do it.
Sure.
Yeah, I can do it. Is it good?
Yep.
So this is one of the most important videos because my family was super excited about having a spectacle bird in their property. This was like a game changer to them. And all my aunts, my uncles, my dad, my mom were saying, we need to protect this because we have an spectacle bird in our property. So this is an endangered species also. It's only found in the Andes. It's the only bear in Latin America. And it's like the gardener of the forest because it feeds on bromeliads and it I don't know how to say that in English, but it clears the forest so other seedlings can grow. And the last one was not so long ago. It was in 2021. It was right after we launched the Habitat Bank, and this talks about how making conservation, taking out the livestock, and just letting and doing conservation actions, restoration actions can bring again wildlife to a territory. Wait. So to date, I'm going to show you the accomplishments we've accomplished. So for the first time, we secured the land and we restricted the land use for 30 years, dedicated to conservation and restoration. We remove all of the livestock, so there's no more livestock in the property. We repurpose the property. So this property was like for 50 years dedicated to cattle ranching, and now it's just dedicated to sustainably use of biodiversity and conservation and restoration. We implemented some fences in order to eliminate threats from neighbors. We started seed selection, and we also do a lot of community outreach and education in the surrounding area. And we've increased land cover and of natural vegetation. So in just like 3 years of the launch of the Habitat Bank, we've already increased land cover of natural vegetation. Now we have three projects. So the first one is the Habitat Bank, of course, and this has enabled the family, so my family, to produce sustainable honey. And we won last year, we won a prize on the world's the 50 best honeys in the world. And we also do nature tourism with universities and with foreign people and local people that want to go hiking in El Globo. We've also started doing conservation restoration actions. We want to thank Mari because she has been a great ranger, super dedicated to conservation. She's been doing Regen vigilance trails in order to reduce the presence of dogs and cats that are a really threat to biodiversity and to all the wildlife that we can find in the globe. And she, because of the vigilance trails, she's also reduced the illegal logging of this farm that I showed you. She's been also seed selecting from the best trees. So this is really important because we can have the appropriate genetic material, and we all can also have the best species for restoration. Not all the species are interesting for restoration at the beginning. So seed selection allow us to really tackle what we need to do in terms of restoration process. And we've built a plant nursery. This is really important because we've have in situ restoration process. This has reduced the cost of restoration and also increased the plant availability. In terms of assurances, and this is to answer Oriana's question, the project is backed by legal and financial assurances that ensure the durability of the project, securing land and cash flows for permanent biodiversity conservation results. These assurances are verified by an independent third party, that it's in this case KPMG. So KPMG assures that we are meeting all of these standards in terms of legally, we have a binding agreement with Terrasos, so covering the opportunity cost for land and taxes for 30 years. There's an easement on the project site, which is registered in the land title, and this easement secures land use just for conservation and restoration. There's a third-party due diligence on property and land owners, and at the end, KPMG is doing the verification process on this, but also on the ecological and management milestones that I will show. Mariana has already explained this financial scheme. So there's a trust with two sub-accounts, one for the short and medium term, and the other one for the long term. That's the endowment that Mariana was talking about earlier. And right now, I'm going to finish by stating the management milestone that we've accomplished. So for year 2020, we signed the land partner agreement. And for year 2022, we registered the Habitat Bank with the Ministry of Environment of Colombia. The project was also registry in the third in the registration platform, in this case with Regen network. The usufruct contract or the easement contract was signed, and the trust with the two sub-accounts was created. And we also did the preliminary base. This is the first tranche of milestones that have to be met in order to release the credits. So in 2002, we released the first credits, and it was KPMG who verified all this process. And in terms of ecological milestones, we've also met already all the milestones that we were supposed to meet in 2024. So no loss of natural and semi-natural land covers for preservation strategies, control over tensioners that had or impede restoration process, decrease the number of introduced exotic species versus the native species, and change in the vegetation structure. We haven't accomplished that. So we are still working on these milestones in order for, in 2024, have the next tranche of credits to be released into the market. So at the end, what we have accomplished is that we've gained biodiversity in time, and what the Habitat Bank and the TBUs allow is to stay in this line of biodiversity gain. So we don't want to go back to what it was back in 2000, as you can see in the picture. We wanted Globo to keep its forest growing and its species thriving in a natural area. And David, back to you.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Mauricio, Mariana, and Gregory. Thank you so much for sharing. We're going to move into a Q&A. We have Simon, who's supposed to be joining us in about 5 minutes. But we have a few questions that where hands have been raised. So if you do raise your hands, if you go to the bottom of your Zoom interface, there's a raise hand, digital raise hand, that allow us to bring you off of mute and allow you to talk and ask your questions. So we're going to go ahead and start doing that. I think first up, been very, very patient. Thank you, Ingrid Losada. I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk. You have the floor, I believe, if you unmute yourself.
Sorry, it wasn't me.
Okay. You're good. Oh, you were there, Ingrid. You were talking just a second ago.
So there are a couple of questions that, so I think maybe we can divide the questions in characteristics of the Cebu. I don't know if there's specific questions also regarding the Regen ledger and the registry and that process, and then the project itself. I'm going to take on the questions that are a little bit more about sort of the system, you know, the Tebu system. There's some questions in terms of minimum size, you know, 30 years and what happens after 30 years, et cetera, et cetera. So as I mentioned, we have, so this El Globo project is specifically 340 hectares, but we have, you can issue Tebus in, you know, in small projects. There's really, in a way, there's no area restriction. For Terrasos, our smallest project is 100 hectares. And our biggest project is 1,000 hectares. And then projects have a combination of preservation and restoration. So the size of your project and the economic feasibility of your project will probably be a, you know, it's a function of the size, but also how intensive the restoration activities are, but also land prices, because we need to acknowledge that there is an opportunity cost to these landowners, and that has to be included in the price.
Okay. What I'm going to go ahead and bring in, there's a couple more questions. H. Vorts, I'm going to open up your ability. And you can now take yourself off of mute if you would like to speak. All right, I'm going to bring on Liliana as well.
Hi, I'm sorry. I think my question has been already answered and I didn't lower my hand.
Okay,
Although
thank you, Liliana.
lower ahead in my screen, sorry.
No problem. Florencia, you're next.
Okay, yeah, hello. Yeah, I wonder how many credits have you sold? You cannot see me. I think my camera must be off, but you don't really need to see me. You already know me. I wonder how many credits have you sold already for El Globo? And how are you marketing your credits? How are you advertising for them? To whom you are directing your marketing?
So we've sold, I would say, about 2,500 credits between corporate buyers, individuals and small companies. And I think, you know, marketing is happening word of mouth. Some of the companies that we've worked with in the past and that we have helped achieve compliance in terms of regulatory requirements with the Colombian government have bought, you know, voluntary credits as a result of that. And so, you know, but it's part of the market testing. So it's very much a word of mouth, direct purchase. Our credits are on Terrasos' website. They're on Regen marketplace. They're also on another marketplace. But you know, the market is learning, and we know that there needs to be that education process in order to be able to convert buyers.
Yeah, can I continue, just to follow up with just a little thing? I know that there are people out there whose business is to work with corporations and tell them what's available and show them what's the best opportunities for them so that they can fulfill all their, they call them ESG, is that right? ESG, environment, social governance requisites and all that. And they also have to conform to certain rules that come from their own government and all that. specifically, this was a person from India who works, that's her job. She's an independent consultant, and corporations, banks and all that pay her to help them choosing what's the best investment for them in terms of biodiversity credits, carbon credits, and all that. So of course, there you have an intermediary who is swallowing a chunk, but maybe that would reach probably a much larger market.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Florencia. Appreciate it. There's a question in the chat from Orion. How does Terrasos set targets for each project's ecological milestones? Example, target levels of species, diversity, structural complexity. Are these milestones static or unique to each project?
They're unique to each project, right? Like it's not the same to work in a cloud forest than it is to work in a dry tropical forest. So when we're doing our baseline, then we're working with academia on these baselines, then they will provide recommendations in terms of what are appropriate targets and what are the indicators that we should be using. But every project's going to be the same. Every project is going to be different. I'm sorry. And that's, and that's the reality behind biodiversity. Every project is going to be different, and we need to be sensitive and acknowledge that reality.
Gregory, this one I think would be good for you. Steve asked, I totally get the conservation side and the quality of assurance you're providing, but I'm confused about Tebu as a cryptocurrency question mark. Will it be convertible? Is there a financial return as well, or is it simply as a valuable public allocation of money that you're promoting?
Yeah, so and Mariana might want to chime in on this as well. But so yes, the blockchain creates the sort of trust conditions for auditability, issuance, governance. So it's an infrastructure, and each table unit can only be issued when the reporting requirements are met. Those table units can be traded, right? And so people could choose, investors could choose if they believe that there's going to be more demand than supply to buy tables now and sell them later as part of their investment in like nature portfolios to support projects getting spun up and then to pass those on. Or companies that are taking biodiversity action now, or individuals who are taking biodiversity action now can buy those table units and retire them and receive essentially the credit for having participated in the uplift that's taking place in El Globo, for instance. I do think that this sort of unitization system can form the foundation of very interesting nature-based currency systems and other things. But this is a sort of specific unit that represents a contribution to a conservation and restoration project, and therefore can be used to make claims against that contribution. And that's the primary value exchange that's taking place. I don't know if you have anything to add, Mariana, because I know the idea of this becoming a sort of, biodiversity currency system is maybe a long-term vision and an idea. I don't know if you want to share anything about that.
I guess I'll add two things, right? So all our habitat banks have an investor base. So for example, the Inter-American Development Bank is one of our main investors to our different projects, right? And as Greg said, as tebus are created, you can buy them to hold them and then sell them to somebody that wants to retire them, or you can just buy them and retire them. And in fact, when when we're kind of accounting for every transaction in these ledgers, you have to say whether you're holding the credit or you're actually retiring And then the other element is that you have to say whether it's for voluntary purposes that you're purchasing the credit, or whether it's for compliance purposes. Because in Colombia, we have a biodiversity compensation law. It's a like-for-like requirement, proximity requirement. Then companies will buy units from our habitat banks to fulfill some of these requirements if they meet both legal and technical requirements, right? So there is a way to earn a return on your investment by participating in the purchase or in the project development of these tebus. But that's a different conversation, I think. And if you are interested in that part of the conversation, do send me a message, and we can talk about how that works. There's also a question about, it's a 30-year investment. Will we be sharing updates? So definitely yes, right? And our commitment is, and that's why working with Regen is critical, is because all project updates are put online and then they're disseminated to the different buyers. And the idea is that any buyer of a tebu can see where the projects stand. But that, one of the things that we're learning is, okay, what do those buyers want and need in terms of information, in terms of anecdotes and stories from our projects, so that we can deliver on that value proposition. But right, that the idea is it's accountability, it's transparency. That's the value proposition behind the work that Terrasos does, but also what we're doing with tebus. And that's what we really need to make sure that happens. Because for many of us that are on this call, we've seen money, come and go into biodiversity conservation projects. The impact is not necessarily there, right? So we need to make sure that these systems and this market infrastructure helps us to make everybody involved accountable. And that's why those three pieces of that governance structure, the biodiversity unit governance, the blockchain governance, and then the project governance are essential to making this work.
Great. I have one more question from Juan Ramos, and then Simon's going to talk about demand drivers, and then we'll trend toward one more Q&A and a little bit about this, how to buy, and we'll move on. So stand by. Juan Ramos, you are now permitted to talk if you'd like to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you. So just to get an understanding about Terrasos' pipeline with being able to create other projects, such as the one that was presented today, just to get an understanding if it's based, if you have an idea that you're going to be based in Latin America, in Colombia. I know you did a lot of regulatory framework. Just to understand a little bit about if your focus is conservation, restoration, a mix. I know you said each project is different, but for example, I'm based in Guatemala and there's a lot of projects that could work for this, but just to get an understanding of where you're coming from.
Yeah. So when we created tebus, and the protocol for issuing these units, we wanted to create a tool that could go beyond Colombian borders and really make it available for Latin America, but also more generally to the tropical belt countries, to have a protocol that has been created by those of us that have worked in these landscapes, that some of us are biodiversity custodians already, and that therefore would be applicable to these contexts. So some of the stress testing that we've been doing to the tebu protocol is in different geographies. So we've been testing it in clearly different landscapes of Colombia, but Brazil, Central America or North, I think Mexico, the US, and also in Africa, for example, right? So that's there. And one of the things that we're certainly working with Regen is how do we, what's the process so that other organizations can issue TEBUs, right? So that we can kind of mainstream that process as well. So happy to engage further if you think it makes sense.
Thank you.
Oops. So thank you, Simon, welcome. I know the time zones got a little screwy, and we're really happy to have you here. We were hoping you could just drop in and share a little bit about your thoughts on some of the demand drivers around biodiversity credits, what the market, if you have a sense of where it's at, and what might be some of the leading indicators or accelerants to bringing biodiversity markets, into full effect.
David, hi. Good evening, my side. I think probably good afternoon somewhere else. Can you hear me okay? All good, great. Well, firstly, thanks very much for inviting me on. It's always a problem when one arrives an hour late because it means I've missed all the fun, and there's always the risk that anything I say, even if it's sort of vaguely right, may have already been said. But let me try and tee up a few comments, and I'll keep it short, and then Mariana or David, if you want, or Greg, you want to come in and sort of push me in a different direction, I won't feel roughed up at all. So, the reality is, coming out of the bubble, that the discussion about biocredits at the moment is both vibrant and toxic. There are lots of different folks with many different views. There's a lot of antagonistic discussion about biocredits in various different forms. And the reality is, perhaps not surprisingly, given the context of what's been happening in voluntary carbon markets over the last couple of years and the kind of scandals that have emerged around it, that the sort of world of biocredits is kind of emerging into a very tough space. Tough in the sense that there's a low level of trust. Tough in the sense that most processes for certification or some kind of validation are treated with suspicion. Low trust in the sense that the whole issue of equitable shares and who gets what, given the very bad experience in most voluntary carbon markets, also another source of low distrust. So there's a kind of world out there that is both excited and dynamic and willing to try things out, and a world out there that is angry, disappointed, frustrated, distrustful, quite aggressive. And so that doesn't mean we shouldn't experiment. We have to experiment, but it means we need to realize that we're kind of going to emerge in a kind of rough and tumble situation, and we need to be just aware that that will happen because of the nature of the conversation around us that often comes from many other contexts. So within that, we're seeing several different types of biocredit markets beginning to emerge. And I'm going to use the term biocredits as a completely generic term. So, some people are using certificates, there are all sorts of other bits of words around. I'm just going to use credits just generally as a sort of general term for this kind of mixture of different kinds of financial instruments, which effectively is what we're talking about here. So, as I came on, Greg or Mariana were making the point, there'll be a bunch of companies that want to buy stuff because they want to make a contribution. They want to be seen that they're making a contribution. They want to be sure that their contribution, has some level of, science-based integrity, or they want to make sure that it's leading to an equitable distribution of the financial flows arising. There are all kinds of reasons that they might flow money. Probably the least important of which will be the reason that we see involuntary carbon markets. You know, that somewhere there's a Microsoft on the other side of the world, kind of having done some sort of nature damage in Timbuktu, and they're being advised that they should be buying Colombian biocredits as a way of compensating for that. You know, the least likely play is a voluntary market with long distance offsets. Yeah, and that's in large part because of the science. You know, a liter of water in Amsterdam is not the same as a liter of water in northern Kenya, and never will be. Yeah, and we can play all kinds of games in creating complex algorithms that appear to give some kind of equivalence, but there will always be a very high degree of distrust in long distance offset models applied in the biocredit space. And we can debate whether that's a good or a bad thing, but I think we need to be aware that, you know, that distrust, you know, is out there, and in part, at least, for good reason. So there is that voluntary side, and I think, as Gregor said, you know, that's going to come through a sort of brand reputation, goodwill stuff, and the credit really is the validation that it's happened. It's the credit claimed for what has happened, and the authority of the credit to be able to demonstrate what's happened. And I would imagine, just as Gregory has said, is that most of that would be retired. Yeah, it seems unlikely to me that that kind of credit is going to be traded, although, you know, humans have a proclivity for trading, so you kind of never know where that's going to land. But one could argue reasonably that what I've just described is probably the smallest part of the story. Yeah, and yet it's the thing that everybody's focusing on. So let me move on to the other two, if you like, market archetypes that I think are beginning to emerge in practice. So, you know, most of you will have, you know, heard discussions about insetting as opposed to offsetting. And I think it's broadly reasonable to describe that as large companies that are making investments in nature or biodiversity somewhere down their supply chain, largely in search of, you know, productivity enhancement or supply security, or building a different set of relationships with different partners. In other words, it's not, if you like, an offset or a compensation or a voluntary compensation or a voluntary contribution associated with brand or goodwill. It's actively investing in, you know, soil restoration in Ghana, specifically in cocoa producers, because you're a company that's buying cocoa from cocoa producers in Ghana, and you're wanting to increase quality, increase productivity, perhaps increase livelihoods of those that are supplying, but it's all basically seeking to enhance the underlying business model at the point at where biodiversity touches the way in which the business process and success works. And that insetting market, you know, actually is not new. You know, Nestle investing in soil regeneration in Ghana doesn't require a biocredit market in a way, but what we're beginning to see are those long-standing supply chain investments crystallizing into claims and the desire for credits, not yet necessarily tradable credits. So if you have a Nestle investing in cocoa, in soil regeneration in Ghana, are they really going to stick that credit on their balance sheet, and are they going to really try and trade that? But what really are they trading it for? Not clear, unless that biocredit became linked to, for example, a lien that Nestle had on buying cocoa from those farmers at particular prices, in which case that claim has somehow created a contractual obligation for the folks who are actually doing the farmer. So you might find all sorts of linkages beginning to emerge between biocredits and other parts of a commercial ecosystem, whether it be down a supply chain or in other contexts. And so I think that will grow, and certainly we're seeing it happening kind of more broadly, but the real scale of it, unknown at this stage. Let me then move on to kind of the third piece quite quickly, which is to do with compensation. And I think the model that we're seeing playing out in Colombia is probably a version of the model that's going to happen at scale around the world. And that might happen at a sovereign level. So in Colombia, you have a statutory comply or compensate model, which effectively has allowed voluntary biocredit markets to emerge to service those that have to pay those compensations. And we see that already in a dozen countries. It looks somewhat different. If you look in the UK or Australia or Colombia or the US, they're not identical models, but they're basically part of a sovereign comply and compensate model, in some shape or form, involving some sort of either traded credit or credit with no secondary markets. And there's some variation in that across different countries. And then briefly, and I know, David, I'm going to bring this to an end, we're beginning to see that comply and compensate model being applied both down financing value chain. So this is no longer statutory, but is, for example, as Mariana said, the Inter-American Development Bank saying, in future, we're going to drive biocredit linked comply or compensate frameworks to those that we are investing in. And we're beginning to see the same in supply chain. So, a Swiss watchmaker saying, if we're buying gold from, somewhere in Africa or Latin America, we might want to down the supply chain drive a comply and compensate model so that the suppliers themselves would need to buy biocredits, which, as in Colombia, would then hopefully stimulate a voluntary biocredit associated with that value chain. Most likely, bring it to a close, David, that last category, that sort of broad comply and compensate model, which could exist sovereign, could exist financing, or could exist supply chain, is going to be the largest driver of biocredit markets around the world. David, let me pass back to you.
Thank you so much, Simon. That was super helpful, those three pillars or points that you made there. We want to move. We got 5 minutes, folks, and we're going to close out our day. Mauricio, could you go ahead and share out my slide, please, on the screen? So it's time to put our money where our mouth is, or where our hearts are when it comes to the biodiversity markets. So I am certainly looking forward to, somebody was asking, like, how are we bringing this to the markets? The Regen network development team is moving out directly into bringing these to chief sustainability officers on the corporate side, moving into institutions, even just the RSVPs. I haven't had a chance to see who actually showed, but we had some major corporations and governments and institutions all who joined today to learn more about this. And we would love to make it as easy as possible for you. So at least as far as your ability to purchase today, they're $25 per TBU. You can purchase them via Stripe with your credit card, or you can go on to the Regen Network marketplace and with the crypto wallet be able to purchase the credits and retire them there directly. So Mauricio, if you have the ability to bring up the screen share again and go to my slide if you're still there, and if not, just let me know.
I'm doing it right now, Dave. Are you not seeing it?
It's not, the screen isn't shared yet. I don't see it. Does everyone else see it?
No, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it.
Okay, wonderful.
I'm seeing it,
okay, good.
but there is a question, and I haven't been able to send all the participants messages, but we're being asked to put the purchase link also on the message box.
Okay, good. I'll put that in the chat also. But if you are interested, I would love to have anyone, whether it's buying 1 TBU or if it's buying 100, if there are any volunteers out there who want to digitally raise their hand and as a sign that you are interested in purchasing, you can go ahead at the bottom, just hit that hand up. Whether you plan on buying 1 or 2 or 5 or 10, that would be just an interesting way of showing your support and commitment to protection of our ecological habitats and a comprehensive regeneration of ecosystems. I'm seeing 9, 10 hands up out of 60 people here. Can we get, I wonder if we get that up to 20 hands or 15 hands. So right now you have the ability to go ahead and take a photo or with your camera on to the QR code. If you would like to take a photo and make a credit card purchase or go to the Regen Network Marketplace. The last thing I'll say is we understand this is not necessarily just a straight up purchase, especially if you're in the corporate institutional space. Myself, as well as the Terrasos team, are totally happy to sit down with you and consult on how to purchase or how to think about integrating this into your meeting your climate goals as a company or bringing this into your portfolio. And also noting that as far as the ability to be able to meet multiple climate goals, you can pair these biodiversity credits, these biodiversity units, excuse me, with ICROA certified carbon credits at Regen Network. You know, certainly with the emergence of this market, we want to give people a really full spectrum set of ecological units that have verified impact and regeneration, and be able to get those easily and seamlessly into your onto your balance sheet and make Earth on everyone's balance sheet. So with that said, are there any final questions as we wrap here? We've got 1 more minute. If you have, there are a couple questions in the Q&A. I think we answered most of those, and if not, feel free to drop something into the chat. And I want to give the opportunity to Gregory, Mariana, and Mauricio to go ahead and offer any final comments.
Thanks, David. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Thank you, Mariana and Mauricio and the whole Terrasos team for all of your hard work. Thanks, Simon, for coming and helping orient us to the state of play in the larger market and you know, how the institutions and market actors are thinking about all of this. And yeah, I'm really excited. I think all of the pieces are here to create an incredibly high integrity way to protect biodiversity and kind of build a bridge into the financial world so that we can flow capital where it needs to at this moment. So I'm super, super excited.
Thank you, Gregory. Mariana?
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, remind everybody that we're at a crossroads, and we're at a crossroads really in terms of how this market develops. And, you know, our invitation to you is to be part of this journey alongside Terrasos. Purchasing Tebus is one way of doing it, but also do stay engaged. If you have comments, questions, suggestions, we're open, and we really want to make sure that biodiversity markets really serve the people that are taking care of that biodiversity in the most rigorous, transparent, and inclusive way. So again, you have the chance to be able to influence that. So stay in touch.
Thank you, Mariana. Mauricio, and I want to give a big shout out to Mauricio. He's been my partner putting together this webinar, and it's taken a lot of work, and he just been really wonderful to work with the Terrasos team. So Mauricio, El Global Steward, thank you. Any final words?
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Mariana and Greg. It's been really hard work, not only building up this webinar, but being here after 25 years of abandonment of the land and having these partnerships. It's a great deal. I mean, I feel really lucky to have everyone on board, and I just want to invite everyone to be on board. For us, it was an opportunity to have a global turn back into a nature reserve and into biodiversity. And I think Tebus are a great chance for everyone to be part of this conservation movement. So if you can and if you want, Tebus is like the right way to conserve ecosystem services and threatened species. And thank David for your words. It was great working with you as well.
Yeah, of course. Well, remember, this takes a global village to bring back our relationship in a healthy way with Mother Earth. If you have connections to institutions, corporate buyers, it's time to plow that capital back into the land to restore the natural ecosystems. Wanted to thank all of you who came. We had a great crowd today. We will follow up with a video recording. Please do share it widely, and let's continue to build this movement. Special thank you to all of our panelists, Mariana, Mauricio, Simon, and Gregory. Please be well. And Mariana, it looks like you have one more thing.
Yeah, there's Aaron is insisting on what happens post 30 years. And I do want to answer that, because what we're doing through the Habitat Bank and through the investment that's going into the Habitat Bank is making sure that that there are economic opportunities based on biodiversity conservation that can go beyond those 30 years. That's why we're investing in building the capacity on the ground, creating alternative livelihood opportunities such as the beekeeping initiative. We're beginning to work on non-timber forest products so that we can really generate and have a transformational impact on that landscape, so that it will be maintained not just for 30 years but beyond. And that's why when we think about milestones that release credit, we don't just think about ecological milestones. So some of those management milestones are attached to these kinds of things, working and being deployed. Because if we don't do that, we might not be able to ensure, what happens after 30 years. So just wanted to close with this. You're really investing in landscape transformation through this process.
Wonderful. And just a final shout out to the Regen Network Development Team, the registry team, Santika, Becca, Corey, and the whole crew, as well as the Terrasos team. A lot of folks who've been working behind the scenes to both the technical methodology and registry side to bring this to life. So big shout and lots of love for all of you. All right, folks, you be well, and please find us online. Let's keep this thing good and going. Bye, everyone.